the science of decision making. So before introducing any new concepts, let us go through two questions. So these questions are usually do not having any right or wrong answer. These are just questions to motivate you to think. The first question is just one statement, and just try to decide whether you agree or disagree with this statement. Positive thinking and visualization can help you achieve your goals. Okay. So I will not comment on these results yet. So we will talk about this towards the end of this lecture. But now let's go to another question that relates to dating. What kind of movie is the best for a first date to get the other person interested in you? Again, no right or wrong answer, just try to motivate you to think. And the reasoning behind your choice is probably more important than your actual answer. So horror movie, romantic movie, comedy movie, animated movie, and boring movie. Now, the outline for the rest of today's lecture, I guess we will not be able to finish all these three topics. Hopefully, we'll be able to finish the first two. So we'll introduce this concept or this model for us to understand the decision-making process, which is called the two system of thinking, which was proposed by Daniel Kahneman, the late Nobel laureate in economics, who is actually a psychologist. And then we will focus on our discussion on this fast system one, the characteristics of system one, which include this associative memory and cognitive ease. And then we will introduce the four most important and commonly observed biases: confirmation bias, overconfident anchoring, and decoy effect. Now, the two systems of thinking. So this idea of two system thinking was actually not first conceived by Daniel Kahneman. It was existing in the field of psychology for many years, but it was Daniel Kahneman who first formally proposed. So this two system thinking consider our decision-making processes as controlled by two systems. We have this system one, which is our automatic system. This is the intuitive system that is fast, unconscious, automatic, effortless, implicit, and emotional. Okay, this is system one. And then we also have another system called system two, the reflective system. This is the reasoning that is slower, deliberate, conscious, effortful, explicit, and logical. Okay, so thinking about all the decisions that have been made before, I mean, if you were consciously making a decision, that's probably that you are using this reflective system, the system two. And most of the decisions that we make actually does not even come into our conscious. Right? It's just controlled by the fast system one. So system one is in control of our innate skills like perception. You don't need to take any effort to see anything. You just automatically see. You cannot even unsee something, right? And the learned skills like language you speak and understanding situations. So, I mean, in different cultures, these different situations will mean different things. And that is a learned process. But once you become natural and in this culture, you don't realize the existence of culture. I mean, you only realize the existence of culture normally when you go to another culture. Right? So this understanding of the social situation is actually some learned skill. And that's also controlled by system one. You do not put any conscious thought in drawing inference and drawing conclusions to the corresponding social situation. And also mental activities that are automatic through prolonged practice, like 2 + 2. If I ask my 3-year-old daughter, what is 2 + 2? I mean, she does not have this concept of numbers yet. It's very difficult for her, you know. And even for calculate 4 + 2 + 2 is actually controlled by system two. It needs to have this deliberation, this effort in order to understand what 2 + 2 is, and probably would need to need the help of the fingers, right? But for us, 2 plus 2, we automatically said is 4 because it's very easy for us. We have calculated this for so many times. It does not require any conscious effort to arrive at the answer. Well, system 2 is in charge of this slow decision making. I mean, anything that is associated with a subjective experience can be considered as controlled by system 2. Attention and effort that used by system 2 can actually be indicated by a very simple measure. If you ask people to make decisions, and you can actually have a sense of how much mental effort they are using by looking at their pupil. So, which is shown here. If you see a pupil dilation, that means they spend so much mental effort in order to imagine what is going on and try to calculate what are the corresponding consequences in order to arrive at the decision. Right? And you can also immediately to see whether they are giving up any effort, giving up trying by looking at their pupil. If their pupil stop dilating, I mean, they actually go back to the normal size. That means they stopped the corresponding effort. Right? So these are the two systems of thinking. I mean, they are in charge of different kinds of decision makings in our life. So we can say that system 2, as we already mentioned, if you are relying on your intuition, your emotions, that means you are relying on system 1. That means probably your decisions are not rational. But system 2 can be considered as more rational, even though I would not say that it's a rational system, but it is a reflective and has a much higher chance to arrive at a correct answer compared to the reasoning of system 1. So now the question that you might want to ask, why don't we always rely on the seemingly more rational and logical system 2 to improve the quality of our decisions? And as we also mentioned, maybe to avoid being tricked by others, right? So if you do not carefully consider the request of comment, I mean, if you reply based on your intuition, your system 1, it's very easy to be tricked by others, to be manipulated by others. Why don't we, as the epitome of intelligence, always using system 2 in order to make not the best, but good decisions and avoid the manipulation and tricked by other people? Have you ever thought about that? So first hand here, yeah.
It's too exhausting for our brain.
Too exhausting for our brain. Anything add to that? Yeah.
Because of cognitive keys, so we want to preserve our energy in our brain.
Yeah, basically the same answers, right? So because whenever you try to use your system 2, it's exhausting. You know that our human brain only accounted for like 20% of our weight, but it's consumed more than 80% of all our energies. Right? So this division of labor by system 1 and system 2 can actually be optimal for us in the sense that it conserves energy. Right? So in order to understand the functioning of system 1 and system 2 and how it helps us to reach not the optimal but satisfactory decisions, we can get back to a model called the triune model. So this is this metaphorical layers of brain. So this is a model. I mean, if you study engineering and science, you probably heard this saying that all models are wrong, but some are useful. So this is a wrong model. We do not have 3 layers in our brain, but it's helpful for us to understand the functioning of brain by roughly divide our brain into 3 layers. So we have this first layer, this reptilian brain. I mean, this part is used to believe that it only exists in reptiles, turtles, lizards, and dinosaurs back in the past. And then we have this limbic system. So this system is in control of our emotions and memory. So this used to be considered that only more advanced animals have this. But it turns out even reptiles have this limbic system. So that's why it's not accurate to call this part as reptilian brain, this as limbic system, but it helps for us to understand the functioning of brain. And neocortex is actually the most advanced part of our brain. And you observe this only mostly in mammals. And I mean, the primates, including human, they have a larger part that is attributed to the neocortex in the brain. So reptilian brain is the part of the brain that controls our instinct. It includes breathing, heartbeat, digestion, our physiology. Limbic system controls or in charge of our memory, emotions, and habits. And then we have neocortex is considered as the most advanced part of our brain. It can be considered as equivalent to our system 2 thinking, more or less equivalent. It's in charge of our critical thinking, self-control, and deliberate change. Right. Now, let's compare the energy consumption of these three parts. I will not give you numbers or statistics. I will just give you an analogy to understand this comparison. If you look at the reptilian brain, it can be considered as this consumption of a small scooter. So you use gasoline to run, and you spend 10 kroners, 1 liter of gas, you can run a long time. A limbic system can be considered as a sedan car, while the neocortex can be considered as a big, huge commercial airplane. Right? So comparing the energy consumption, I mean, if you are always relying on our neocortex, our system 2, that means you consume too much energy. And energy is quite important, especially in our evolutionary past. Here, now, maybe you consider consuming some energy to lose some weight is a good deal. But back in our evolutionary past, it's very difficult to find the corresponding resources for food, for a substance, as actually quite important for us to conserve energy. So this reliance on system 1, meaning that the reliance on reptilian brain and limbic system help us to conserve energy, and which was crucial for survival in our evolutionary past. Okay, so that's why it's actually quite exhausting if we are trying to use our system 2 all the time. You probably would be stressed out and go to the hospital if you're always thinking about everything, every decision that you're trying to make. And there's actually a term for that kind of people, paranoid. So that's why we don't want to always rely on system 2. And the division of labor by system 1 and system 2 is actually good for us and can be considered as more or less optimal for our evolutionary past. So here, this is just an analogy. It's not an accurate description of the amount of energy consumed by different part of our brain. Okay? So this comparison is actually consistent with our human nature being lazy. Humans are wired to be lazy because our evolutionary past wired us in the way that we should conserve our energy whenever possible. We talk about that sometimes you need to run to hunt to get the food for you, but whenever it's possible, you just sit in the couch and without doing anything. That's the human nature. And this, if we discuss this scope from the physical activity to brain activity is the same thing, right? So we want to rely on system 1 is because we want to conserve energy. We are lazy by nature. Now we understand why we need this division of labor by system 1, system 2. So it's now worth discussing the relationship between these two systems. So usually, system 1 generates impressions and feelings. We know that system 1 are emotional, right? So these feelings and impressions generated by system 1 are usually provides the information, and important information for system 2 to make decisions. And system 2, at the same time, have some ability to change the way system 1 works by programming functions of attention and memory. So for example, through prolonged practice, certain effortful activities can become effortless and automatic, right? So I guess all of you know how to bike. At first, it was difficult for you to bike. You have to have your conscious attention to make sure that you are balanced. You pay attention to all the parts of your body so that you are able to bike. And now, as this transportation tool, you probably don't think about biking, and you can then, even on your phone, listen to your audiobook and go sightseeing while you're biking. So that's because biking switch from a system 2 activity to system 1 activity. Playing a musical instrument, for example, and even the chess master, when they start playing chess, is a system 2, and when it becomes a second nature, it's again becomes system 1. Of course, when there are difficult situations, they need to constantly think about it again. But when they play against me, they don't need to think about it. Right? They just play automatically. And also studying second language. So I have English is not my mother tongue, but since I have been using it for so many years, it's I do not need to use a lot of mental effort in order to speak English. But whenever I speak Danish, I'm a beginner in Danish. It's still very difficult. I need to fumble around the words that to come out of my mouth next, and also to think about the grammar and think about all kinds of things. I have to actually, it's actually exhausting for me to speak Danish. And I guess for a lot of you, when you study a new second language, it's the same process. But once you have been using it for so many years, it's become system 1 activity. You do not need to spend so much energy and consciousness towards using that corresponding skills. So there's a famous book, Outliers, by Malcolm Gladwell. That's actually talking about this converting system 2 activity to system 1. It's introduced this idea of a 10,000 hours rule, right? So there are many examples. They mentioned that like Beatles, when they become the famous band in the world, they have practiced and performed for 10,000 hours. And he listed many examples that you have to spend a long period of time of practice, of conscious practice in order to become an expert, so that the corresponding skills become system 1 activity. And you do not need to consciously pay attention to it in order to achieve this corresponding performance. So that's the relationship between these two systems. And also, when we are dealing with our daily life, we mainly depend on our system 1. System 2 only takes over when things get difficult and when something unexpected by system 1 is detected. All right. So again, this is because of the nature of being lazy. So we don't want to use mental effort whenever possible, right? And we only need to use our mental effort when these things get difficult and something unexpected need to be handled by us. Then we start to pay attention. But all activities require some attention and mental energy. Even system 1, like breathing, counting, those are system 1 activity. But even though they consume much less energy compared to system 2, they are still consuming a certain amount of energy. But we know that people have limited attention and mental energy. So that means when you are using your system 2 to an extreme, that would actually be able to interfere some of your system 1 activity. For example, if you are asked to compute this 27 times 46, it's very difficult to calculate by heart, then you are likely to stop walking, right? Because that requires a lot of energy. Walking, even though it's a system 1 activity, it takes some energy, some attention from your brain. And I just had a road trip in China, and I definitely noticed that when I drove on this winding, narrow mountain road, I stopped talking with my wife because that requires my dedicated attention so that I will not run into some accident, because talking definitely take away some of my mental energy, then take away some of my attention. And that's why while you are driving, you are not suggested to take your phone, right? So in other countries, it's actually illegal to use your phone while you are driving, because even though driving is system 1 activity, does not require a lot of attention from you, but when something unexpected happens, this phone, talking on the phone, just distract your attention, and that make accident very likely to happen. As you become skilled in a task, its demand for energy would diminish. So when you play musical instrument, for example, writing a bag, for example, you have a lot of wiring in your brain because you need to pay attention to a lot of situations that are new to you. But once you get familiar, become an expert in playing a musical instrument, then fewer brain regions are involved in an action as your skill increases. And here is a quite interesting observation. So this graph demonstrates the connections between neurons as we develop from newborn to adult. Okay? So when we were just born, we have very few wiring or connections between our neurons. So as we grow older, our neurons, the connection actually become much more intense, right? And it's actually reach a peak when you're around 2 years old. But after that, these connections actually become fewer, right? But at the same time, it becomes stronger. So this is actually implying this a lot of activities that were system 2 activity as when we were young become system 1 activity because we stop paying too much attention. When you start an activity, you pay attention to a lot of situations, a lot of factors, and that requires a lot of wiring. But once it becomes an innate skill, innate activity, so a certain wiring becomes stronger, have a stronger connection, but some irrelevant factors, irrelevant firings are just prone because you realize that, your brain realizes that you do not need to pay attention to many factors because those factors are not that important for your current activity. So humans are sculpted by environment they happen to drop in as more activities become innate. Right? Also, it's quite interesting to observe that the language that you are exposed to in infancy, when you are infant, a baby, refines your ability to hear the particular sound of your language and worsen your capacity to hear the sound of other languages. It's quite interesting that if you're exposed to multiple languages when you are young, before 2 years old, it's easier for you to pick up those language later on. If you are just exposed to one language, it's very difficult for you to pick up because you notice that those are the sound in your language, and you only pay attention to those sounds because all the other sound does not mean anything in that specific particular language. But if you are adapted to that one specific language, when you learn a second language, it becomes very difficult for you because some of the sound that means very different things and it contains an important information in that language does not mean anything in this language. So it becomes difficult. Like in Chinese, we know we have different tones. In the Mandarin, we have 4 different tones. It's very difficult for English speaking or others language speaking people to pick it up because the 4 tones does not mean anything in most other languages. So you do not need to pay attention to that. And then because your system 1 just decided to ignore those important information, even though it's important in Chinese language, but it's irrelevant in the other language, then it's very difficult when you become adult to pick up this very delicate information from the tone. Right? So that's how this conversion of system 2 activity to system 1 can sometimes make it difficult to adapt to a new social environment. Right? Now, talking about limited capacity of attention, we should be aware that attention is needed to notice something unusual. Right? When you have this intense focus on a task, this focus can make people blind to some stimulus. So this is so-called inattentional blindness or change blindness. So let me show you one video. So now my question I want to leave you is that just count how many passes these players have in this video. Right? So that's a question for you. So you see that the players. How can we go back then? The players in the black uniform, they only pass to the players with the same uniform, and the same for the yellow shirt one. And so how many passes have you counted? Well, it doesn't matter that much, because the following question I want to ask is, how many of you have noticed this moving gorilla in this view? We do have some, right? So, you there? But it's not that easy to see, because if you are not focusing on the task, it's not difficult for you to see the moving galactic, because it's very unusual. But if you are too focused on my question and try to find the answer to that question, your focus attention actually cause your system one to be ignorant of some of the important stimuli in the environment, right? So that is the so-called inattentional blindness. So this is not only occurring in regular people, even pilots that require their strong attention. When they try to have this basketball experiment, a lot of them fail to notice the moving gorilla. Right? So here we have another interesting one. Let's also spend a couple of minutes on it.
Most of us think we're pretty observant, but with a bit of mind control, I wanted to see if I could make these people take even the most obvious things for granted. Can I get to Trinity Church from here? See that church down there? Yeah, straight to there. Yeah. Trinity Church, is it? 19 Freedom Park. Okay. Well, we're down here somewhere, aren't we? Yes, I need to. You keep going back.
So you see the two gentlemen asking for the directions, they actually have different voice, even though they look a bit similar, but if you pay attention, they are actually quite a lot of differences that you could notice. But throughout this so-called experiment, I remember only 1 out of 20 people noticed that there's a people swap. And the interesting thing is that they are confident that the people are the same, right? So people are actually usually surprised by the missing important information. We are actually blind to our blindness. We think that we cannot get things like this wrong, but as experiments demonstrate, it's actually quite easy for us to get this important information wrong, right? So this is telling us that when system 2 is BCO tired, system 1 has more influence. So that means we are more likely to be influenced by empty persuasive message and also more prone to cognitive biases. So that means after 1 day of study or 1 day of work, when you sit in the couch or watch some of the commercials, you are more likely to take in the information with any critical thinking, right? Because by then, your system 2 is already tired. So then system 1 is more likely to take over. You are more influenced by these empty messages, and you are more easily to be manipulated by some so-called persuasive tricks. And here is a quite interesting illustration. You can intentionally direct people's attention. Right? So this is how common, and also sometimes when thieves want to steal your things. I don't know whether you have experience. I went to another country, so I have some teenagers coming to me. I mean, they just usually, they have some physical contact with you, and even usually very strong physical contact with you, and then they just take something of you, because this contact, when it's hitting you, actually draws your attention to the part that was contacted by other people. And when there's some other changes you will fail to notice. And that's how, if you do not have a personal experience, you see a lot of movies demonstrate that, right? So when you try to steal something from some people, you just appear to be run into the other person by accident and try to take, because this diversion of this attention would actually make it easier for you to steal successfully. So here, I need to apologize for the low sound, but you should be able to get the basic idea. So this movie Focus is a quite great movie to understand some of the human natures, especially our system, the division of labor of system 1 and system 2, and also some of the biases. So we will watch another clip from this video. But here, let's see how you can actually intentionally direct people's attention.
I'm pretty good. We're talking about it.
Okay, so that's the idea. So sorry, apologize for the low sound. I cannot tune it up. So basically, that's a good illustration of how human attention works, right? So that's also how magicians do their work. So they direct your attention to somewhere, and then something in the other place changes, and so that you think it's not possible become possible, and that become magic. So that is the working of our attention. Now, let's talk about the rationality of system 2. Even though we say that system 2 is more rational than system 1, but is it really a rational decision system? Well, let's again look at the brain structure and try to understand the working of system 2. So the activation of the prefrontal cortex is a feature of system 2. I mean, we talk about one feature or one measure of the usage of system 2 is a dilation of pupil. Right? And also this dilation of pupil is usually related to the activation of prefrontal cortex. So the prefrontal cortex only appears in primates and is most advanced in human. And it's actually quite interesting to know that our prefrontal cortex not fully developed until you reach almost 23, 24 years old. So I think some of you have not fully developed. So that's why we see the teenagers. I mean, their cognitive skills are already comparable to adults, but their self-control, their emotional control are very low, because prefrontal cortex is actually the system 2 that controls our emotion and try to coordinate the emotion and try to use the emotion to assist decision-making rather than being controlled by the emotion. Even though we know that this prefrontal cortex is actually a feature of the activation of the system 2, we notice that emotion is actually shown to play an important role in almost all system 2 decisions. So sometimes we say that system 1 is emotional, system 2 is rational, but it's actually not an accurate description. System 2 decisions, all those decisions you have to get emotions involved in order for us to be able to have the final step to take the action, right? So here is a very interesting brain structure called amygdala. This amygdala is an almond-shaped organ in our brain. Amygdala is actually from Greek means almond. So this is actually related to emotional response. And we do have one part of this prefrontal cortex is called ventromedial prefrontal cortex, or VMPFC, is actually connects this emotional input, mainly controlled by amygdala and other organs, to the rest of the prefrontal cortex. So this connection between amygdala, between emotion, and the rest of the prefrontal cortex is actually vital for our decision making. Okay. So here's an interesting case. Damasio is a neuroscientist. He reported a successful lawyer permanently struck in indecision after minor brain surgery. So he just simply cannot make any decisions. But at the same time, the cognitive skills is not influenced at all. He can have a good performance in cognitive tasks. He can list all the pros and cons of different alternatives, but he just simply cannot make the final step to take the action of choosing one alternative over the other. And further investigation demonstrate that these symptoms were caused by the lesion between amygdala and this prefrontal cortex, meaning that this VMPFC, there's a lesion. So the prefrontal cortex is disconnected from the emotional response. And because this lack of emotional response, he just cannot make any decision. Even the cognition, the cognitive skills functions are not influenced at all, right? So here is a video that demonstrates a similar case. Is a female that have this influence, this symptoms of a permanent indecision. And it's actually a similar case to this Damasio's lawyer. So let's just watch this to understand the influence of emotion, even in system 2 decision making. So yeah, so this Tammy's case is very similar to Damasio's lawyer. So there's a disconnection between emotional system and the rational, so-called rational system. So because of this disconnection, it's very difficult for her to make any decisions. And it turns out that any decisions that we make, even the so-called decisions made by system 2, has to have some emotional push or emotional pull. So thinking about Sheldon, what he needs, I mean, he can list all the pros and cons, but if we give some emotional push or emotional pull, maybe he has a good memory with PS4 or the previous version of PS, it may be easier for him to choose a PS4, right? So this actually give us this idea that when we make decisions, it's not the fight between emotion and rationality. Okay, so sometimes we say that my emotion is fighting my rationality. It's not the case. All of your decisions are actually is a combination of your emotion. Emotion is a quite vital final step to push you to make the final decision, right? So it's not the fight between emotional rationality or sense and sensibility. It's actually emotion. It's actually assisting your rationality to reach decisions. And here is actually a good study demonstrating this. It's confirmed the statement that reason alone can never be a motive to any action of the will. So this experiment, this study shows that purchasing decision can be predicted by the activation of brain parts associated with the feelings, not the rational deliberation. Even though you use the rational deliberation from your prefrontal cortex, but the final purchasing decision is actually pushed by some of the emotional part in your brain, right? So these two parts, I mean, the details are not important. It include this nucleus accumbens is activated in anticipation of reward, and the insula is activated in anticipation of pains. So these are closely related to our emotional experience, right? So this means when we are using system 2 to make decisions, we are actually trying to use system 2 to summarize the pros and cons of a purchase and try to summarize them into emotions, into feelings. And it is the feeling that eventually lead us to the corresponding purchasing decision. Right? So it is a context of conflicting feelings determine the decision, while reason only informs feelings. It's not the conflict between emotions and rationality. It's just the conflict between different kinds of feelings, while rationality is finally just providing and assisting this fight. So here is a good quote by David Hume. It's just reason is and ought only to be the slave of the passion. So information can only influence decision if it talks to emotion. I mean, an important lesson that you could learn from today's lecture is that emotion is quite important for our decision making and also for our persuasion. Right? So here, for example, in the case of Sheldon, if you are able to have some emotional appeal to Sheldon, then it will be much easier for you to convince him to purchase one PlayStation to the other.